Professor Quibbleton Fluffernutter was having what he considered to be a perfectly ordinary Tuesday morning at the Galactic Institute of Physical Excellence, which was located in a tastefully designed space station that orbited the civilized world of Pleasantria Prime. The institute was renowned throughout 47 star systems for producing the galaxy's most adequately trained physical education instructors, all of whom possessed the necessary qualifications to teach basic motor skills to species whose idea of extreme physical activity involved reaching for the remote control. The morning's crisis began when Fluffernutter's communication device emitted the sort of urgent beeping that usually indicated either a cosmic emergency or someone had accidentally scheduled two different species for the same gymnasium at the same time, which amounted to roughly the same thing in terms of paperwork requirements. "Professor Fluffernutter," squeaked his assistant, Gerbelduk Wibblesnatch, whose species resembled nothing so much as an anxious jellyfish crossed with a filing cabinet. "We have a problem. The admission computer has accepted an application from someone called Tommy Brewster." Fluffernutter looked up from his carefully organized lesson plans with the mild interest of someone who had spent 3 decades dealing with bureaucratic mishaps and had developed the professional detachment necessary to maintain sanity in an academic environment. "What's unusual about that, Wibblesnatch? We accept applications from qualified candidates throughout the galaxy." "But Professor," Wibblesnatch's gelatinous form was now vibrating at frequencies that suggested either extreme agitation or the early stages of a mechanical breakdown. "He's listed as species designation human." The silence that followed was the kind usually reserved for moments when someone mentions they've accidentally declared war on a peaceful neighboring system or forgotten to file their taxes for the past 17 years. "Human?" Fluffernutter repeated slowly, as if the word had been spoken in an ancient dialect that roughly translated to paperwork nightmare of cosmic proportions. "From Earth," Wibblesnatch continued, his voice rising to octaves that were causing the office plants to wilt. "The computer classified it as a Class 12 Deathworld, with a sub-designation of approach only with hazmat suits and last will testament." Professor Fluffernutter had been teaching physical education to various alien species for longer than most civilizations had possessed written language, and in that time he had encountered students whose idea of physical fitness ranged from barely mobile to occasionally twitches when motivated. He had never, however, encountered anyone from a planet that required hazmat suits and legal documentation to approach safely. "Surely there's been some mistake," he said, with the optimism of someone who had not yet grasped the full scope of what was about to happen to his carefully ordered existence. "Run a verification check on the application." Wibblesnatch manipulated his control interface with the frantic efficiency of someone operating emergency equipment during a natural disaster. "The application is legitimate, Professor. Tommy Brewster, age 19, enrolled in our Basic Galactic Physical Education Certificate program. He's requesting accommodation for what he calls standard human exercise requirements." "Standard human exercise requirements?" Fluffernutter consulted his species database with growing concern. "Computer, display information about Earth humans and their physical capabilities." The holographic display that materialized above his desk showed what appeared to be a bipedal creature that looked deceptively similar to several dozen other species, except for certain characteristics that made absolutely no sense according to established biological principles. "According to this data," Fluffernutter read aloud, his voice taking on the hollow tone of someone discovering that reality was significantly more complicated than advertised, "humans are capable of running continuously for distances that would kill most civilized species, lifting objects that weigh more than their own body mass, and surviving in atmospheric conditions that range from frozen wasteland to volcanic hellscape." "It gets worse, Professor," Wibblesnatch added helpfully. They apparently engage in something called recreational combat sports, where they deliberately attempt to render each other unconscious for entertainment. The morning's second crisis arrived when Dr. Binglebert Snodgrass, the Institute's chief medical officer, burst through the office door with the expression of someone who had just discovered that his entire understanding of physiology needed to be completely revised. "Fluffernutter, Doctor." Snodgrass wheezed, his breathing apparatus working overtime to process what appeared to be either extreme exertion or a complete nervous breakdown. "Have you seen the medical requirements for this human student?" "I was just reviewing his application," Fluffernutter replied, though his voice suggested that he was beginning to suspect that reviewing the application might have been a tactical error of cosmic proportions. "He's requesting access to something called a weight room, where he intends to repeatedly lift heavy objects for no practical purpose whatsoever." Dr. Snodgrass consulted his medical scanner with the expression of someone whose equipment had just started providing readings that violated several fundamental laws of biology. He wants equipment that allows him to suspend himself from horizontal bars and repeatedly pull his entire body weight upward. "That sounds strenuous," Fluffernutter admitted. "Strenuous?" Dr. Snodgrass's voice cracked like a teenage blorthling going through puberty. "According to his medical history, this creature regularly engages in activities that would hospitalize most of our current students. He runs for miles. He lifts objects weighing hundreds of pounds. He plays games that involve being tackled by other humans who are also lifting hundreds of pounds." Professor Fluffernutter was beginning to develop the sort of headache that usually required prescription medication and a long vacation in a sensory deprivation chamber. "Doctor, Snodgrass, surely you're exaggerating. No species could survive that level of physical stress on a regular basis." "That's what I thought." Dr. Snodgrass pulled out what appeared to be a data pad containing enough medical information to stock a small library. "But according to Earth medical databases, humans consider this normal. They have entire industries dedicated to creating more efficient ways to engage in potentially harmful physical activities." The third crisis of the morning materialized when Coach Grimbleton Bofflesnork arrived, looking like someone who had just been informed that his understanding of basic physics was completely wrong, and also that his job security was about to become a matter of philosophical debate. "Gentlemen," Coach Bofflesnork announced, with the grim authority of someone delivering news that would fundamentally alter everyone's understanding of reality, "I've been reviewing the exercise equipment requirements submitted by this Tommy Brewster character." "And?" Fluffernutter asked, though his tone suggested that he wasn't entirely sure he wanted to know the answer. "He's requesting access to devices that simulate various forms of torture that his species apparently considers recreational." Coach Bofflesnork consulted his list with the expression of someone reading his own death warrant. "Treadmills that force continuous running, stationary bicycles that go nowhere but require constant pedaling, rowing machines that simulate manual labor." "Manual labor?" Whibblesnatch squeaked, his gelatinous form now vibrating at frequencies that were causing nearby electronics to malfunction. "Apparently, humans used to propel watercraft using nothing but their own muscular power, and they've created machines that allow them to recreate this experience for fun, Doctor." Snodgrass was now making calculations on his medical scanner that suggested either advanced mathematical analysis or the early stages of a complete psychological breakdown. "Coach, according to the biometric data, this human's resting heart rate is higher than most species' emergency cardiac levels." "What does that mean?" Fluffernutter asked weakly. "It means that when he's relaxing, his cardiovascular system is operating at levels that would indicate life-threatening medical emergency in 90% of known species." The morning's fourth and final crisis arrived in the form of a communication from the Institute's insurance department, delivered by Bingleberry Snorkelwort, whose job involved calculating the probability of various catastrophic events and determining how much money would be required to clean up the resulting mess. "Professor Fluffernutter," Snorkelwort announced with the cheerful efficiency of someone whose day job involved contemplating disaster on a cosmic scale, "I've completed the risk assessment for admitting a human student to our physical education program." "And?" Fluffernutter asked, though by this point he was fairly certain that the answer would involve either evacuating the space station or updating his resume. "The computer crashed," Snorkelwort replied with satisfaction. "Apparently, the probability calculations exceeded the maximum values our system was designed to handle. The insurance actuarial program declared the situation mathematically impossible and recommended that we consider relocating to another galaxy." Professor Fluffernutter looked around his office at the assembled representatives of the Institute's various departments, all of whom were staring at him with expressions that suggested they were hoping someone else would make the decision about how to handle a situation that had apparently broken their computer systems through sheer impossibility. "Gentlemen," he said with the resigned authority of someone who had just realized that his peaceful career in education was about to become significantly more complicated, "schedule Mr. Brewster for orientation tomorrow morning. And perhaps we should prepare the emergency medical bay." "All of them?" Dr. Snodgrass asked hopefully. "All of them." The morning of Tommy Brewster's arrival at the Galactic Institute of Physical Excellence dawned with all the ominous tranquility of a cosmic calm before a very large and very complicated storm. Professor Fluffernutter had spent the previous evening reviewing emergency evacuation procedures and wondering if perhaps he should have pursued a nice, safe career in something less dangerous, like bomb disposal or professional volcano monitoring. The Institute's main gymnasium was a marvel of galactic engineering, designed to accommodate the physical education needs of species whose exercise requirements ranged from gentle floating to mild ambulatory movement. The equipment had been carefully selected to provide appropriate challenges for beings whose idea of vigorous activity involved raising one appendage slightly higher than usual. Tommy Brewster appeared at exactly 0800 hours, which was impressive considering that most species required at least 3 days to figure out the space station's transportation system. He was accompanied by what appeared to be enough personal exercise equipment to outfit a small military training facility. "Mr. Brewster," Professor Fluffernutter called out with the forced cheerfulness of someone greeting a natural disaster, "welcome to the Institute. I trust your journey was uneventful." Tommy grinned, with the sort of enthusiasm that immediately made everyone present wonder if they should update their insurance policies. "Actually, Professor, the zero-gravity sections of the station are amazing for calisthenics. I managed to get in a full workout during the transport from the docking bay." The silence that followed this statement was filled with the sound of Dr. Snodgrass's medical scanner emitting warning beeps that suggested either equipment malfunction or the detection of impossible biological readings. "You exercised in zero gravity?" Coach Bottlesnork asked, with the tone of someone carefully confirming that they had heard correctly before filing an incident report. "Sure. Push-ups, pull-ups, some basic acrobatics. The maintenance crew seemed really interested in watching. They kept asking if I needed medical assistance, which was super nice of them." Wibblesnatch was now vibrating at frequencies that were causing interference with the station's communication systems. "Mr. Brewster, our maintenance crew consists of highly trained emergency response specialists whose job is to prevent catastrophic accidents." "Oh," Tommy's expression suggested that this information was both surprising and delightful. "Well, they seemed to enjoy the show. A few of them started taking videos, which I thought was really supportive." Professor Fluffernutter was developing the expression of someone who had just realized that his understanding of the word emergency might need some revision. "Mr. Brewster, perhaps we should begin with some basic assessments to determine your current fitness level." "Great. What did you have in mind?" Coach Bofflesnork consulted his standard evaluation protocols with the careful precision of someone whose training had not included procedures for assessing beings who might accidentally break reality through excessive enthusiasm. We'll start with a simple cardiovascular assessment. Please step onto this treadmill and we'll begin with a gentle walking pace. Bow. The treadmill in question was a sophisticated piece of equipment designed to provide appropriate exercise for species whose maximum safe velocity was roughly equivalent to a leisurely stroll through a particularly pleasant garden. It had been carefully calibrated to prevent overexertion, cardiac stress, or any activity that might require medical intervention. Tommy examined the machine with the sort of professional interest that suggested he was evaluating its potential for purposes that its designers had never intended. This is nice, very compact design. What's the maximum speed? Maximum speed. Coach Bofflesnork consulted the equipment specifications with growing concern. According to the manufacturer, it's capable of achieving velocities up to... Oh, Professor Fluffernutter asked, though his tone suggested that he suspected the answer would involve either technical difficulties or existential crisis. The maximum speed is listed as sufficient for all known species, which, according to the fine print, translates to approximately 3 miles per hour. Tommy's expression suggested that this information was both amusing and slightly puzzling. 3 miles per hour? That's slower than my normal walking pace. Do you have anything that goes a little faster? Dr. Snodgrass was now consulting his medical references with the frantic efficiency of someone whose professional expertise was being challenged by biological impossibilities. Mr. Brewster, what would you consider a normal running pace? Well, for easy jogging, maybe 7 or 8 miles per hour. For actual running, probably 12 to 15. I mean, nothing too crazy, just basic cardio maintenance. The gymnasium fell silent, except for the sound of sophisticated exercise equipment, apparently reconsidering its life choices, and Coach Bofflesnork's coaching certification quietly filing for divorce from his professional confidence. 12 to 15 miles per hour, Professor Fluffernutter repeated slowly, as if the numbers might make more sense if he pronounced them carefully. For basic cardio maintenance. Yeah, I know it's not much, but I'm here to learn proper galactic fitness techniques. Maybe you guys have some advanced training methods that could help me improve. The statement hung in the air like a cosmic challenge to everything the Institute's faculty thought they understood about physical education, biological limitations, and the fundamental nature of what constituted reasonable exercise expectations. Doctor. Snodgrass looked up from his medical scanner with the expression of someone whose equipment had just provided readings that suggested either equipment malfunction or the presence of a biological anomaly that challenged current understanding of physiology. Mr. Brewster, your resting heart rate appears to be 42 beats per minute. Is that bad? Tommy asked with genuine concern. It's lower than most species achieve during deep sleep, Dr. Snodgrass replied weakly. And your blood pressure readings suggest cardiovascular efficiency that exceeds our measurement capabilities. Oh, cool. I've always been pretty healthy. My high school coach said I had good genetics for endurance sports. Coach Bofflesnork was now staring at his standard fitness assessment forms as if they had been written in an ancient language that described impossible physical phenomena. Mr. Brewster, what exactly constitutes endurance sports on your planet? You know, the usual stuff. Marathon running, triathlon, ultra-distance cycling, maybe some mountain climbing on weekends? Mountain climbing, Whibblesnatch whispered, his gelatinous form now producing bubbles at an alarming rate. He climbs mountains for recreation. Well, not just for recreation, Tommy clarified helpfully. Sometimes it's for training. Cross-training is really important for maintaining overall fitness. Professor Fluffernutter was beginning to suspect that the morning's activities were going to require a complete revision of the Institute's educational philosophy, safety protocols, and possibly their understanding of what constituted physically possible behavior. Perhaps, he suggested, with the careful optimism of someone proposing a solution to a problem that might be fundamentally unsolvable, we should move on to strength assessment? The Institute's strength assessment facility was designed around the principle that most civilized species could safely manipulate objects weighing approximately 10 to 15% of their body weight without risking injury, existential crisis, or insurance claims that required interdimensional litigation to resolve. Coach Bofflesnork led Tommy to what appeared to be a sophisticated piece of equipment that resembled a particularly user-friendly torture device designed by someone with a degree in ergonomics and a minor in optimistic thinking. "This is our strength evaluation apparatus," Coach Bofflesnork explained, with the professional pride of someone whose job involved making exercise seem less terrifying than it actually was. It's designed to provide safe, measured resistance for determining optimal exercise parameters. Tommy examined the machine with the sort of focused attention that suggested he was trying to figure out whether it was some kind of elaborate joke or a piece of equipment that had been designed for a completely different species. "How much weight does it handle?" he asked with the tone of someone making polite conversation while secretly wondering if he was being pranked. "It provides resistance up to 50 pounds, Coach Bofflesnork announced, with the satisfaction of someone whose equipment represented the pinnacle of galactic exercise technology. "That's sufficient for strength training for 97% of known species." The silence that followed this announcement was the kind usually reserved for moments when someone realizes they have accidentally brought a butter knife to a nuclear physics conference. 50 pounds, Tommy repeated slowly, as if he were trying to translate the number into a measurement system that made sense within his understanding of exercise equipment. "Yes, our engineers designed it to provide challenging resistance while maintaining absolute safety protocols." Tommy looked around the gymnasium with the expression of someone who had just realized that he might be participating in a very elaborate cultural misunderstanding. "Do you have anything heavier?" "Heavier?" Dr. Snodgrass asked, his medical scanner now emitting sounds that suggested either critical system failure or the detection of biological readings that exceeded its design parameters. "Well, I usually warm up with about 150, and for actual strength training I typically work in the 250 to 300 range, depending on the exercise." Professor Fluffernutter felt his understanding of physical education undergo the kind of rapid revision usually reserved for scientific theories that had been conclusively disproven by someone discovering that gravity worked differently than expected. "Mr. Brewster," he said carefully, "are you suggesting that you regularly lift objects weighing 300 pounds? "Oh, that's not too heavy," Tommy replied with the cheerful enthusiasm of someone whose perspective on weight training had been calibrated by a species that apparently considered massive objects to be recreational equipment. "I mean, I'm not a powerlifter or anything. Some of the guys at my gym back home could bench press 400 or 500 pounds. The gymnasium's ambient lighting seemed to dim slightly, as if the space station's power systems were having difficulty processing the implications of what they had just heard. Coach Bofflesnork was now consulting his exercise physiology references with the desperate efficiency of someone whose professional credentials were being challenged by mathematical impossibilities. 400 or 500 pounds? "Yeah, there's this guy named Big Mike who could deadlift almost 800. Really nice guy, actually. He gave me some great tips on proper form." Whibblesnatch's gelatinous mass was now vibrating at frequencies that were causing sympathetic resonance in nearby exercise equipment, creating a low humming sound that suggested either mechanical malfunction or the universe's way of expressing confusion. "Mr. Brewster, Doctor," Snodgrass said, with the clinical detachment of someone whose medical training was being systematically challenged by biological phenomena that seemed to violate basic principles of anatomy. According to my calculations, lifting 800 pounds would require muscle density and skeletal strength that exceed the theoretical limits for carbon-based life forms. Well, Big Mike was pretty built, Tommy admitted. But honestly, he was just naturally strong. Genetics, you know. Plus he ate a lot of protein and did his cardio. Cardio? Professor Fluffernutter repeated, as if the word had taken on new and potentially terrifying significance. Yeah, he'd run 5 miles every morning before hitting the weight room. Said it helped with recovery and kept his heart healthy. The assembled faculty exchanged glances that suggested they were collectively wondering whether Tommy Brewster was an elaborate practical joke, designed by someone with a particularly twisted sense of humor and access to advanced holographic technology. Perhaps, Professor Fluffernutter suggested, with the careful optimism of someone proposing a compromise that might prevent the complete collapse of his educational institution, we could move on to flexibility assessment. The Institute's flexibility assessment area was designed around the principle that most species could safely move their joints through a limited range of motion without causing injury, diplomatic incidents, or scenarios that required explanation to insurance investigators who specialized in impossible claims. The equipment consisted of various padded surfaces and measuring devices that had been carefully calibrated to assess the mobility limitations of beings whose idea of stretching involved moving slightly less slowly than usual. This should be more manageable, Coach Bofflesnork said, with the relieved tone of someone whose professional confidence was attempting to recover from recent traumatic experiences. Flexibility assessment doesn't involve lifting heavy objects or achieving impossible velocities. Tommy approached the assessment area with the sort of casual interest that suggested he was willing to participate in whatever cultural activities his hosts considered appropriate, even if they seemed somewhat unusual by his standards. "What kind of flexibility exercises did you have in mind?" he asked politely. "Standard range of motion evaluation, Dr. A. Snodgrass explained, consulting his assessment protocols with the determination of someone whose medical expertise was staging a comeback after being thoroughly confused by previous events. "We'll measure your ability to bend, stretch, and move your joints through their normal range." "Sounds good. Should I do some basic stretches to warm up?" Before anyone could respond, Tommy had begun what appeared to be a routine stretching sequence that immediately caused every piece of monitoring equipment in the gymnasium to start registering readings that suggested either equipment malfunction or the presence of biological phenomena that violated several fundamental principles of anatomy. "What exactly are you doing?" Professor Fluffernutter asked, his voice carrying the tone of someone who was beginning to suspect that his understanding of the word basic needed significant revision. "Just some standard warm-up stretches," Tommy replied, casually bending one leg behind his head while maintaining perfect balance on the other foot. "Hamstring stretches, hip flexors, a little spinal mobility work." "Doctor." Snodgrass's medical scanner was now producing a continuous stream of warning beeps that suggested either critical system failure or the detection of joint mobility that exceeded the design parameters of beings who possessed endoskeletons. Your leg," Wibblesnatch whispered, his gelatinous form now displaying color patterns that indicated either severe distress or the optical equivalent of system overload. "Oh, this." Tommy cheerfully demonstrated what appeared to be the ability to rotate his joints through ranges of motion that should have required surgical intervention to achieve. "Yeah, I've always been pretty flexible. My yoga instructor says I have good natural mobility." "Yoga instructor?" Coach Bofflesnork asked weakly. "It's a human practice that combines flexibility training with strength building and mental focus," Tommy explained, while casually placing both hands flat on the floor without bending his knees. Really great for maintaining joint health and core stability. The monitoring equipment was now displaying readings that suggested Tommy's spine could bend in ways that challenged current understanding of vertebrate anatomy, while his joints appeared to possess range of motion that exceeded what should have been possible without complete skeletal reconstruction. "Mr. Brewster, Doctor," Snodgrass said, with the clinical fascination of someone whose medical curiosity was overriding his sense of professional self-preservation, "your flexibility measurements are indicating joint mobility that exceeds our reference standards by approximately 300%. "Is that good?" Tommy asked, performing what appeared to be a casual backbend that allowed him to look at the assembled faculty while technically standing upside down. "It's unprecedented," Dr. Snodgrass admitted. "According to our databases, achieving this level of flexibility should require either surgical modification or belonging to a species that doesn't possess rigid skeletal structure." "Nope, just regular human bones," Tommy replied cheerfully, effortlessly returning to an upright position. "Though I do take calcium supplements, my mom's always worried about bone density." Professor Fluffernutter was now experiencing the sort of philosophical crisis that usually required extensive therapy and possibly a complete career change to resolve adequately. "Mr. Brewster," he said, with the careful precision of someone whose worldview was undergoing rapid and uncomfortable revision, "I think we need to discuss modifications to our standard curriculum." The emergency faculty meeting that followed Tommy Brewster's orientation session was held in Conference Room Omega, which was typically reserved for discussing crises that threatened the fundamental stability of the Institute's educational mission. The room's advanced soundproofing was designed to prevent sensitive conversations from being overheard by students, government inspectors, or cosmic entities that might use such information for purposes that could destabilize local space-time. Professor Fluffernutter floated at the head of the conference table, surrounded by the Institute's senior faculty, all of whom were displaying various symptoms of what the medical staff had classified as acute pedagogical trauma disorder. "Colleagues," Professor Fluffernutter began with the weary authority of someone whose career had just encountered an obstacle that couldn't be resolved through traditional educational techniques. "We need to address the Tommy Brewster situation." Dr. Snodgrass consulted his medical reports with the expression of someone whose understanding of biology had been systematically dismantled by a 19-year-old who considered lifting heavy objects to be recreational activity. "According to my preliminary assessment, Mr. Brewster's physical capabilities exceed our measurement standards by factors that require mathematical notation I'm not qualified to use. How exactly do we teach physical education to someone whose resting state exceeds our equipment's maximum performance parameters?" Coach Bofflesnork asked, his voice carrying the hollow tone of someone whose professional expertise had been revealed to be hilariously inadequate for current circumstances. "The insurance implications alone are staggering," added Bingleberry Snorkelwort from the Risk Assessment Department. "Our liability coverage was designed for species whose idea of extreme physical activity involves standing up quickly. We are not insured for students who consider lifting heavy objects to be warm-up exercises." Whibblesnatch's gelatinous form was producing nervous bubbles at a rate that suggested either extreme anxiety or the biological equivalent of steam pressure release. "What if he accidentally breaks something? Our equipment wasn't designed to handle forces that exceed architectural tolerances." "Or break someone else," Dr. Snodgrass added helpfully. "His cardiovascular efficiency suggests that he could accidentally outperform our other students to a degree that might cause psychological trauma." Professor Fluffernutter looked around the conference table at colleagues whose confidence in their chosen profession was undergoing the kind of systematic dismantling usually reserved for outdated scientific theories or poorly designed furniture. "The fundamental problem," he said slowly, as understanding dawned like sunrise over a landscape of shattered assumptions, is that our entire curriculum is based on the assumption that physical education involves helping students achieve modest improvements in basic motor function. Exactly, Coach Bofflesnork exclaimed, with the enthusiasm of someone finally articulating a problem that had been nagging at his subconscious. Our teaching methods are designed for beings who need encouragement to engage in minimal physical activity. How do we teach someone who considers our maximum challenge level to be recreational warm-up? The question hung in the air like a cosmic riddle designed by someone with a particularly twisted sense of humor and a degree in educational philosophy. Perhaps, suggested Dr. Binglewort from the Curriculum Development Department, whose job involved creating educational programs that were both challenging and achievable. We could develop specialized coursework specifically for unusually capable students. Specialized how? Professor Fluffernutter asked, though his tone suggested that he suspected the answer would involve either significant budget increases or the complete reconstruction of their facility. Well, we could research exercise equipment designed for species with enhanced physical capabilities. Dr. Binglewort consulted his notes with the optimism of someone proposing a solution that might actually work. There must be other civilizations that deal with students who possess exceptional fitness levels. Whibblesnatch's bubbling intensified to levels that were causing interference with the conference room's ventilation system. What if there aren't any other civilizations that deal with students like this? What if humans are completely unique in their approach to physical fitness? The possibility that Tommy Brewster might represent a form of biological impossibility that existed nowhere else in the known galaxy settled over the conference room like a blanket made of uncomfortable questions and administrative nightmares. There's another issue, Doctor, Snodgrass added, with the clinical detachment of someone whose medical training compelled him to mention problems that everyone was probably hoping to ignore. Mr. Brewster's presence in our standard classes could create safety hazards for our other students. Safety hazards? Professor Fluffernutter asked, though experience had taught him that when Dr. Snodgrass mentioned safety hazards, the situation was probably more complicated than it initially appeared. Consider what happens when we ask our students to participate in group activities with someone whose physical capabilities exceed their own by orders of magnitude. Dr. Snodgrass explained patiently. Team sports, competitive exercises, collaborative fitness challenges. The conference room fell silent as the assembled faculty contemplated scenarios involving Tommy Brewster accidentally dominating every physical activity through sheer biological superiority. He could win every competition without trying, Coach Bofflesnork said quietly, not because he's trying to show off, but because his casual effort exceeds everyone else's maximum potential. That would destroy our other students' confidence, Professor Fluffernutter realized with growing horror. They'd never feel adequate again. Worse, Doctor, Binglewort added, it could destabilize our entire grading system. How do you assign grades when one student's basic participation exceeds everyone else's exceptional performance? The administrative implications were beginning to cascade through the conference room, like a domino effect designed by someone whose understanding of cause and effect had been influenced by exposure to cosmic irony. What about equipment damage? Snorkelwort asked, with the practical concern of someone whose job involved calculating the cost of replacing things that had been broken through enthusiasm rather than malice. Our facilities weren't designed to handle the forces that human exercise apparently involves. And what about the other students' psychological well-being? Dr. Snodgrass continued. Imagine trying to maintain motivation for personal fitness improvement when your classmates' warm-up routine exceeds your maximum possible achievement. Professor Fluffernutter was developing the expression of someone whose career in education was revealing complexities that had never been covered in his training. Colleagues, I believe we're facing an unprecedented educational challenge, which is Coach Bofflesnork asked, though his tone suggested that he wasn't entirely sure he wanted to know the answer. How do you teach physical education to someone who's accidentally better at it than the instructors? The morning of Tommy Brewster's first official gym class dawned with all the ominous tranquility of a cosmic practical joke that was about to reach its punchline. Professor Fluffernutter had spent the previous evening reviewing emergency procedures and wondering if perhaps the Institute's insurance policies included coverage for educational experiences that challenged the fundamental nature of reality. The gymnasium had been specially prepared for what the faculty was privately referring to as the Tommy situation. The additional medical equipment had been positioned around the perimeter. Emergency communication devices had been tested, and Coach Bofflesnork had practiced several different ways to explain to parents why their children might return home with existential questions about their own physical capabilities. The other students began arriving at 0900 hours, representing a diverse cross-section of galactic species whose exercise requirements ranged from minimal movement to carefully supervised gentle activity. They included Blibbleton Snurfwhistle, whose species achieved cardiovascular fitness through controlled breathing exercises, Griselda Flomperton, who belonged to a civilization that considered walking to be moderately strenuous activity, and Quinbert Bofflesnatch, whose people had evolved past the need for physical exertion and were attending the class primarily for academic credit. "Welcome, students," Professor Fluffernutter announced, with the forced cheerfulness of someone whose professional confidence was being held together by optimism and emergency medical protocols. "Today, we'll be conducting basic fitness assessments and introducing fundamental exercise concepts." The students arranged themselves in a loose circle with the careful precision of beings whose understanding of physical education had been shaped by species whose idea of vigorous activity involved moving slightly faster than usual. "Before we begin," Professor Fluffernutter continued, "I'd like you all to meet our new student, Tommy Brewster, who comes to us from a planet with unique fitness traditions." Tommy waved cheerfully at his new classmates, completely unaware that his mere presence was causing several sophisticated monitoring devices to register readings that suggested either equipment malfunction or the detection of biological anomalies that challenged current understanding of anatomy. "Hi, everyone!" Tommy called out with the genuine enthusiasm of someone who was excited to learn about galactic fitness techniques. "I'm really looking forward to working out with you all." The casual use of the phrase "working out" caused Blibbleton Snurfwhistle to emit high-pitched squeaking sounds that his species used to indicate either extreme confusion or the early stages of panic. "Working out?" Griselda Flomperton asked carefully, as if the words might have meanings that weren't immediately apparent to beings whose exercise vocabulary consisted primarily of terms like gentle movement and mild exertion. "You know, exercising, getting a good sweat going, pushing ourselves to improve our fitness levels," Tommy explained helpfully, apparently unaware that his explanation was causing several students to develop the expression of beings who had just realized they might be in over their heads. Coach Bofflesnork stepped forward with the professional composure of someone whose job involved making exercise seem less terrifying than it actually was. "Let's begin with some basic warm-up activities. Everyone spread out, and we'll start with some gentle stretching." The students arranged themselves across the gymnasium floor with the careful precision of beings whose understanding of stretching involved moving their joints through ranges of motion that wouldn't cause injury, embarrassment, or scenarios that required medical intervention. "Just follow my lead," Coach Bofflesnork instructed, demonstrating what he considered to be a moderately challenging stretch that involved reaching toward his toes while maintaining perfect safety protocols. Tommy observed the demonstration with polite interest, then began what appeared to be his own interpretation of basic stretching, which immediately caused every piece of monitoring equipment in the gymnasium to start registering readings that suggested either calibration errors or the presence of joint mobility that exceeded design parameters. "What exactly is he doing?" Quinbur Bottlesnatch whispered to Griselda Flumperton, his voice carrying the tone of someone whose understanding of physical anatomy was being challenged by visual evidence that seemed to violate basic principles of skeletal structure. "I think he's stretching," Griselda replied uncertainly, watching as Tommy casually performed what appeared to be a series of movements that would have required surgical intervention for most species to achieve. Littleton's snurf whistle was now producing a continuous stream of squeaking sounds that suggested either mechanical malfunction or the biological equivalent of a nervous breakdown. His spine appears to be bending in directions that shouldn't be structurally possible. Dr. Snodgrass, who was monitoring the session from what he considered a safe distance, consulted his medical scanner with growing concern. "According to these readings, Mr. Brewster's flexibility measurements are exceeding our reference standards by approximately 400%. Is that normal for his species?" Coach Bofflisnork asked weakly, watching as Tommy effortlessly performed what appeared to be a casual backbend that allowed him to wave at his classmates while technically upside down. "Define normal, Doctor." Snodgrass replied with the clinical detachment of someone whose medical expertise was being systematically challenged by biological phenomena that seemed to exist outside established parameters. Tommy completed his stretching routine and looked around at his classmates with the friendly curiosity of someone who had just noticed that everyone else was staring at him with expressions ranging from amazement to existential terror. "Everything okay?" he asked cheerfully. "Do you guys want me to show you some of these stretches? They're really great for maintaining joint health." The offer to share stretching techniques caused a ripple of panic to pass through the assembled students, who suddenly realized that they might be expected to participate in activities that challenged their understanding of what their bodies were theoretically capable of achieving. "Perhaps," Professor Fluffernutter suggested, with the diplomatic skills of someone whose job involved preventing educational experiences from becoming traumatic events, "we should move on to cardiovascular assessment." The Institute's cardiovascular assessment protocols were designed around the principle that most species could safely achieve mild elevation of heart rate without causing medical emergencies, insurance claims, or scenarios that required explanation to regulatory authorities who specialized in impossible accidents. Coach Bofflisnork led the group to the gymnasium's exercise equipment area, where a collection of carefully calibrated machines stood ready to provide appropriate cardiovascular challenges for beings whose idea of intense exercise involved moving slightly faster than their normal walking pace. "We'll start with basic treadmill assessment," Coach Bofflisnork announced, with the professional confidence of someone whose equipment had been thoroughly tested on dozens of different species and had never caused any problems more serious than mild exertion-induced dizziness. The students arranged themselves beside various treadmills, each of which had been specially configured to provide safe, measured cardiovascular challenge without exceeding the physiological limitations of civilized beings. "Everyone set your machines to comfortable walking pace," Coach Bofflisnork instructed. "Remember, this is assessment, not competition." Tommy examined his assigned treadmill with the sort of polite interest that suggested he was trying to figure out how to use equipment that had been designed for a completely different purpose than what he was accustomed to. "What's the maximum speed on this?" he asked, consulting the control panel with growing puzzlement. "Maximum speed is 5 miles per hour, Coach Bofflisnork replied proudly. "That's sufficient for cardiovascular challenge for 98% of known species." 5 miles per hour. Tommy repeated slowly, as if he were trying to translate the measurement into something that made sense within his understanding of exercise equipment. That's actually slower than my normal walking pace. And the gymnasium fell silent, except for the gentle humming of treadmills operating at velocities that were apparently insufficient to provide meaningful exercise for someone whose cardiovascular system had been calibrated by a species that considered running to be recreational activity. "Perhaps you could walk more slowly," Professor Fluffernutter suggested, with the optimism of someone proposing a compromise that might prevent the complete breakdown of his assessment protocols. "I can try," Tommy replied cheerfully, stepping onto the treadmill and beginning what appeared to be the slowest walking pace his body was capable of producing without actually stopping. Dr. Snodgrass's medical scanner immediately began registering readings that suggested either equipment malfunction or the detection of cardiovascular efficiency that exceeded the device's design parameters. "His heart rate is actually decreasing," Dr. Snodgrass announced with the fascination of someone whose medical training was being challenged by biological phenomena that seemed to violate established principles of exercise physiology. "Decreasing?" Coach Bofflesnork asked, his voice carrying the tone of someone whose understanding of cardiovascular response was undergoing unwelcome revision. "Apparently, walking at 5 miles per hour is so unstimulating for his cardiovascular system that it's having a sedative effect," Dr. Snodgrass explained, consulting his readings with growing bewilderment. It's like giving him a nap." Tommy, completely unaware that his casual stroll was causing a minor crisis in exercise science, looked around at his classmates with friendly interest. "How's everyone doing? This is really relaxing. It's like a moving meditation." Blibbleton Snurf Whistle, who was struggling to maintain his balance on a treadmill, moving at 2 miles per hour, squeaked out what appeared to be either encouragement or a distress call in his native language. "Mr. Brewster," Professor Fluffernutter said carefully, "would you be interested in increasing the challenge level?" "Sure. What did you have in mind?" Coach Bofflesnork consulted his exercise protocols with the expression of someone whose professional training was about to be tested by circumstances that hadn't been covered in any educational manual he'd ever read. "We have some experimental equipment," he said slowly, "designed for species with enhanced cardiovascular capabilities." "Enhanced?" Tommy asked with interest. "Equipment that can achieve velocities up to 15 miles per hour. The number hung in the air, like a challenge to the fundamental assumptions about what constituted reasonable exercise expectations for civilized beings. 15. Tommy's expression suggested that this was more promising, but still somewhat puzzling. "That's not bad for a warm-up. Do you have anything that goes faster?" The question caused Coach Bofflesnork to experience the sort of professional crisis that usually required career counseling and possibly complete retraining in a field that involved fewer challenges to one's understanding of physical possibility. "Faster than 15 miles per hour?" he asked weakly. "Well, for actual cardio training, I usually work in the 20 to 25 mile per hour range," Tommy explained with the casual tone of someone discussing perfectly normal exercise requirements. "But I understand if your equipment has limitations. We can work with whatever you've got." Dr. Snodgrass was now making calculations on his medical scanner that suggested either advanced mathematical analysis or the early stages of complete psychological breakdown. 25 miles per hour would require cardiovascular efficiency that exceeds theoretical limits for most carbon-based life forms. "Really?" Tommy seemed genuinely surprised by this information. I guess humans are just naturally good at cardio. My high school track coach always said endurance was our species thing." The revelation that Tommy's exercise requirements exceeded the Institute's equipment capabilities by factors that required scientific notation to express accurately settled over the gymnasium, like a cosmic practical joke designed by someone with access to advanced physics and a twisted sense of humor. "Perhaps," Professor Fluffernutter suggested, with the diplomatic skills of someone whose job involved finding solutions to problems that challenged the fundamental nature of reality. We should move on to strength training. The Institute's strength training facility was a testament to galactic engineering, designed to provide safe, measured resistance for species whose maximum lifting capacity ranged from light objects to moderately heavy objects without exceeding the structural limitations of beings who possess standard skeletal density and muscle fiber composition. Tommy followed the group to the weight room with the sort of polite interest that suggested he was eager to learn about galactic fitness techniques, even if they seemed somewhat different from what he was accustomed to. "This is our main strength training area," Coach Bofflesnork announced with the professional pride of someone whose facility represented the pinnacle of galactic exercise technology. "All equipment has been carefully calibrated to provide appropriate resistance for a wide range of species." The weight room contained an impressive array of sophisticated machinery, each piece designed to challenge users without exceeding their physiological limitations or causing injuries that would require interdimensional litigation to resolve. "What's the heaviest weight available?" Tommy asked, examining the equipment with the sort of professional curiosity that suggested he was evaluating its potential for purposes that its designers might not have anticipated. "Our maximum resistance setting provides up to 100 pounds of resistance," Coach Bofflesnork replied proudly. "That represents the upper limit of safe lifting capacity for most civilized species." Tommy's expression suggested that this information was both interesting and slightly puzzling, as if he were trying to understand equipment specifications that had been designed according to principles he wasn't familiar with. 100 pounds, he repeated thoughtfully. "That's actually lighter than my normal warm-up weight." The weight room fell silent, except for the gentle humming of sophisticated exercise equipment, apparently reconsidering its design specifications, and Coach Bofflesnork's professional confidence quietly filing for early retirement. "Warm-up weight?" Professor Fluffernutter asked, with the careful precision of someone whose educational philosophy was undergoing rapid and uncomfortable revision. "Yeah. I usually start with about 150 for basic movements, then work up to my training weight," Tommy explained helpfully. "For bench press, I typically work in the 250 to 300 range, depending on whether I'm focusing on strength or endurance." Dr. Snodgrass's medical scanner was now producing a continuous stream of warning beeps that suggested either critical system failure or the detection of strength capabilities that exceeded the device's ability to process numerical values. 300 pounds, Blibbleton Snurf Whistle whispered, his voice carrying the tone of someone whose understanding of physical strength was being challenged by mathematical concepts that seemed to violate basic principles of biology. "Oh, that's not really that much," Tommy replied with the cheerful modesty of someone whose perspective on weightlifting had been calibrated by a species that apparently considered massive objects to be recreational equipment. "I'm not a powerlifter or anything. I just try to stay in decent shape." Griselda Flumperton was now displaying color patterns that her species used to indicate either severe distress or the biological equivalent of system overload. "What do you consider?" "Not decent shape? Well, I suppose someone who couldn't lift their own body weight would be pretty out of shape," Tommy said thoughtfully. "Though I guess that depends on the person. Everyone's got different fitness goals." The casual suggestion that lifting one's own body weight was a basic fitness requirement caused a ripple of existential panic to pass through the assembled students, most of whom belonged to species whose maximum lifting capacity was approximately 15% of their body weight. "Mr. Brewster," Coach Bofflesnork said with the careful diplomacy of someone whose professional expertise was being systematically dismantled by a teenager who considered strength training to be a hobby, "our equipment may not be adequate for your training requirements." "That's okay," Tommy replied with genuine enthusiasm. I'm here to learn. Maybe you guys have different training methods that could teach me something new. The statement hung in the air like a cosmic challenge to everything the Institute's faculty thought they understood about the relationship between teachers and students, expertise and learning, and the fundamental nature of what constituted advanced physical education. Different methods? Professor Fluffernutter asked weakly. Sure, every culture probably has unique approaches to fitness. I bet galactic training techniques could really help me improve. The possibility that Tommy Brewster was expecting to learn something from instructors whose maximum capabilities were exceeded by his warm-up routine settled over the weight room like a philosophical crisis designed by someone with a degree in educational irony. Perhaps, Dr. Snodgrass suggested, with the clinical detachment of someone whose medical training compelled him to propose solutions even when those solutions challenged his understanding of biological possibility, we should focus on technique refinement. Technique refinement, Tommy asked with interest. Proper form, breathing coordination, safety protocols, Dr. Snodgrass explained hopefully. Aspects of exercise that don't depend on raw strength or cardiovascular capacity. That sounds great, Tommy agreed enthusiastically. Form is really important. My trainer back home always said that good technique prevents injuries and improves efficiency. Coach Bofflersnork seized on this opportunity with the desperate enthusiasm of someone whose professional relevance was staging a comeback after being thoroughly confused by recent events. Excellent. Let's start with basic lifting form assessment. The basic lifting form assessment began with what Coach Bofflersnork considered to be a simple demonstration of proper technique using the lightest weights available, which in this case meant objects that weighed approximately 5 pounds and had been designed to provide minimal resistance for beings whose strength training involved very careful manipulation of very light objects. Tommy observed the demonstration with polite attention, nodding at appropriate moments and asking questions that suggested genuine interest in learning proper galactic fitness techniques. The key principle, Coach Bofflersnork explained with renewed confidence, is controlled movement that maintains proper spinal alignment while engaging appropriate muscle groups. That makes sense, Tommy replied. Mind-muscle connection is really important for effective training. The casual use of the phrase mind-muscle connection caused Quinbert Bofflesnatch to emit sounds that his species used to indicate either deep philosophical contemplation or the early stages of mental breakdown. Now, let's see your interpretation of proper lifting form, Coach Bofflesnork suggested, gesturing toward the 5-pound demonstration weight. Tommy picked up the weight with the sort of casual ease that suggested he was handling an object whose mass was so negligible that his nervous system barely registered its existence. "Like this?" he asked, performing what appeared to be a textbook-perfect demonstration of proper lifting technique, except that the weight was so light compared to his normal training that his movements had a dreamlike quality that suggested he was performing the exercise in slow motion. That's actually perfect form," Coach Bofflesnork admitted, with the surprised tone of someone whose expertise was proving to be relevant, after all. "Thanks. Form really matters when you're working with heavy weights," Tommy replied. "Proper technique prevents injuries and helps you get the most out of your training." "Heavy weights," Dr. Snodgrass repeated slowly, as if the phrase had taken on new and potentially troubling significance. "Yeah, when you're lifting serious weight, even small form breaks can cause problems," Tommy explained helpfully. "That's why it's so important to practice good technique with lighter weights first." The revelation that Tommy considered 5-pound weights to be practice weights for developing technique that would later be applied to serious weights caused the assembled faculty to experience the sort of educational epiphany that usually required advanced degrees in cosmic irony to appreciate fully. "Mr. Brewster," Professor Fluffernutter said, with the careful precision of someone whose understanding of pedagogy was undergoing fundamental revision. "Perhaps you could Demonstrate the techniques you use with heavier weights. Sure, though I'd need heavier weights to really show you proper form, Tommy replied. These 5-pound weights are great for demonstration, but they're too light to really engage the muscles properly. The casual dismissal of the Institute's heaviest training weights as too light to really engage the muscles properly caused Coach Bofflisnork to experience the sort of professional revelation that usually required therapy and possibly a complete career change to process adequately. "What weight would you need," he asked carefully, "to demonstrate proper heavy lifting technique?" "Well, for a basic demonstration, maybe 150 or 200 pounds, Tommy suggested thoughtfully. "Something light enough to focus on form without being distracted by the weight itself." The gymnasium fell silent, except for the sound of sophisticated exercise equipment, apparently questioning its fundamental purpose, and several faculty members quietly reconsidering their chosen profession. 150 pounds, Blibbleton Snurfwhistle whispered, "for demonstration purposes? Yeah, when you're trying to show proper technique, you want enough weight to engage the muscles and demonstrate the movement pattern, but not so much that you can't focus on form details," Tommy explained, with the patient tone of someone whose understanding of strength training had been shaped by principles that apparently existed outside the Institute's educational framework. Professor Fluffernutter looked around the gymnasium at equipment that had been carefully designed to provide appropriate exercise challenges for civilized beings, and suddenly realized that his entire educational institution might need to be completely redesigned to accommodate a single student whose casual exercise requirements exceeded their maximum capabilities. "Mr. Brewster," he said, with the diplomatic authority of someone whose job involved making impossible situations seem manageable, "I think we need to discuss alternative curriculum options." The Emergency Curriculum Committee meeting was convened in Conference Room Alpha, which was typically reserved for discussions involving fundamental changes to the Institute's educational mission, budget crises that threatened institutional survival, or discoveries that challenged the basic assumptions underlying galactic physical education. Professor Fluffernutter sat at the head of the conference table, surrounded by department heads whose confidence in their chosen profession had been systematically dismantled by a single student whose exercise requirements seemed to exist outside established parameters of biological possibility. "Colleagues," Professor Fluffernutter began with the weary authority of someone whose career in education had just encountered challenges that weren't covered in any training manual. "We need to completely rethink our approach to physical education." "Completely rethink?" Dr. Binglewort asked, though his tone suggested that he suspected the answer would involve either massive budget increases or fundamental changes to their understanding of what constituted reasonable educational objectives. "Tommy Brewster has demonstrated that our current curriculum is designed for species whose physical capabilities exist within a very limited range," Professor Fluffernutter explained patiently. "Our equipment, our teaching methods, our assessment protocols, everything assumes that students will operate within predictable parameters of strength, endurance, and flexibility. And Tommy operates outside those parameters," Coach Bofflisnork added, with the hollow tone of someone whose professional expertise had been revealed to be hilariously inadequate for current circumstances. "Way outside those parameters," Dr. Snodgrass corrected. "According to my measurements, his capabilities exceed our maximum standards by factors that require scientific notation to express accurately." Whibblesnatch's gelatinous form was producing nervous bubbles at a rate that suggested either extreme anxiety or the biological equivalent of a pressure cooker about to explode. "What do we do with a student whose warm-up routine exceeds our advanced curriculum?" "That's the fundamental question," Professor Fluffernutter agreed. "How do we provide meaningful education to someone whose baseline capabilities exceed our teaching capacity?" The question hung in the air, like a cosmic riddle designed by someone with a particularly twisted understanding of educational philosophy and access to biological impossibilities. Perhaps, suggested Dr. Grimblethwaite from the Advanced Studies Department, whose job involved developing coursework for exceptionally capable students, we could create a specialized track for students with unusual physical capabilities. Specialized how? Coach Bofflesnork asked, with the desperate hope of someone whose professional relevance was looking for any opportunity to stage a comeback. Well, we could research exercise techniques used by other high-capability species, Dr. Grimblethwaite explained optimistically. Surely there are other civilizations that deal with beings who possess exceptional physical abilities. What if there aren't? Wibblesnatch bubbled frantically. What if humans are completely unique in their approach to physical fitness? The possibility that Tommy Brewster might represent a completely unprecedented form of biological capability that existed nowhere else in the galaxy settled over the conference room, like a cosmic practical joke designed by someone with access to advanced genetics and a twisted sense of humor. There's another consideration, Doctor. Snodgrass added, with the clinical detachment of someone whose medical training compelled him to mention complications that everyone was probably hoping to ignore. The psychological impact on our other students. Psychological impact? Professor Fluffernutter asked, though experience had taught him that when Dr. Snodgrass mentioned psychological considerations, the situation was probably more complex than it appeared. Consider the effect on student motivation when one classmate's casual performance exceeds everyone else's maximum potential achievement, Dr. Snodgrass explained patiently. How do you maintain enthusiasm for personal improvement when your best effort is exceeded by someone else's warm-up routine? The conference room fell silent as the assembled faculty contemplated the motivational implications of having a student whose accidental performance could systematically demoralize every other person in the program. He could destroy their confidence without even trying, Coach Bofflesnork realized with growing horror. Not through malice, but through simple biological superiority. And what about grading? Dr. Binglewort added, his voice carrying the tone of someone whose administrative responsibilities were revealing complexities that challenged basic principles of academic assessment. How do you assign grades when one student's basic participation exceeds the performance standards for everyone else? We'd have to create completely separate evaluation criteria, Professor Fluffernutter said slowly, as understanding dawned like sunrise over a landscape of administrative nightmares. Different standards, different expectations, essentially a different curriculum. A curriculum of one, Coach Bofflesnork added quietly. Which raises the question, Doctor. Snodgrass continued with relentless medical logic, of whether we're providing education or simply observing a biological phenomenon that happens to attend our classes. The philosophical implications of this observation settled over the conference room, like a blanket made of uncomfortable questions about the fundamental nature of teaching, learning, and what constituted meaningful educational experience. Perhaps, Professor Fluffernutter suggested, with the careful optimism of someone whose job involved finding solutions to problems that challenged the basic assumptions of his profession, the solution is to learn from Mr. Brewster, rather than trying to teach him according to our existing methods. Learn from him? Dr. Binglewort asked with interest. Study his techniques, understand his training methods, adapt our curriculum to incorporate knowledge that could benefit our other students, Professor Fluffernutter explained, his voice gaining confidence as he spoke. Instead of treating him as a problem to be solved, treat him as a resource to be utilized. A living laboratory for advanced physical education research, Dr. Snodgrass added with growing enthusiasm. We could document his methods, analyze his techniques, develop new approaches to fitness education, Coach Bufflisnork was beginning to display the expression of someone whose professional crisis was transforming into an opportunity for unprecedented educational innovation. We could revolutionize galactic physical education, develop new standards, new methods, new understanding of what's possible. And in the process, Professor Fluffernutter concluded with satisfaction, provide Mr. Brewster with the one thing our traditional curriculum couldn't offer him, which is, Whibblesnatch asked hopefully, the opportunity to be a teacher. The transformation of Tommy Brewster from problematic student to inadvertent faculty member occurred with the sort of bureaucratic efficiency that only academic institutions can achieve when faced with situations that threaten their fundamental purpose and require immediate improvisation to prevent complete institutional collapse. The new Experimental Physical Education Research Program was established within 48 hours of the Emergency Curriculum Committee meeting, complete with specialized budget allocations, modified insurance coverage, and diplomatic immunity clauses that protected the Institute from liability claims that might result from educational activities that challenged established understanding of biological possibility. Tommy's first official day as a student research consultant began with a comprehensive interview conducted by Dr. Snodgrass, whose medical curiosity had overcome his professional self-preservation instincts. Mr. Brewster, Dr. Snodgrass began with the clinical enthusiasm of someone whose career was about to be defined by the documentation of impossible phenomena. Could you explain the basic principles of human physical training? Sure, Tommy replied cheerfully, apparently unaware that his explanation was about to revolutionize galactic understanding of exercise physiology. The main idea is progressive overload, gradually increasing the challenge to force your body to adapt and get stronger. Progressive overload, Dr. Snodgrass repeated, making careful notes. And how do humans typically implement this principle? Well, you start with weights or exercises that challenge you, then gradually increase the resistance, duration, or intensity over time, Tommy explained patiently. Your body adapts to the stress by getting stronger, faster, or more flexible. The concept of deliberately stressing biological systems to force adaptive improvement was so fundamentally alien to galactic educational philosophy that Dr. Snodgrass needed several minutes to process the implications. You deliberately stress your body to force it to improve? He asked carefully. Exactly. The principle is, use it or lose it. If you don't challenge your muscles, cardiovascular system, and flexibility, they atrophy, Tommy continued. But if you provide appropriate challenges, they adapt and become more capable. Dr. Snodgrass was now making calculations that suggested either advanced physiological research or the early stages of a complete paradigm shift in his understanding of biological development. And this works. And for all humans? Pretty much. Everyone responds differently and people have different genetic potentials, but the basic principle applies to everyone, Tommy confirmed. That's why we have so many different types of exercise: strength training, cardio, flexibility work, sports training, endurance challenges. Endurance challenges? Professor Fluffernutter asked, joining the interview with the expression of someone whose educational curiosity was overcoming his administrative caution. Sure, marathons, ultramarathons, triathlons, adventure races. Tommy's enthusiasm for the subject was apparent. Some people run 100-mile races through mountains, or swim across lakes, or cycle across continents. The casual mention of recreational activities that involved covering distances that most species considered to be suitable for interplanetary travel caused Professor Fluffernutter to experience the sort of educational epiphany that usually required advanced degrees in cosmic absurdity to appreciate fully. People run 100 miles for recreation? He asked weakly. Well, ultra-endurance is a pretty specialized sport, Tommy admitted. But yeah, humans love challenges. The harder something is, the more satisfying it feels to accomplish it. They seek out difficult challenges, Dr. Snodgrass noted, making observations that were systematically dismantling his understanding of rational behavior for satisfaction. Exactly. There's something really rewarding about pushing your limits and discovering what you're capable of, Tommy explained with the passion of someone whose species had apparently turned suffering into entertainment. Plus, the training process teaches you a lot about perseverance, goal-setting, and mental toughness. The revelation that humans had developed philosophical frameworks around deliberately challenging themselves for psychological development caused the assembled faculty to experience the sort of intellectual vertigo that usually required medication and possibly therapy to resolve. "Mr. Brewster," Professor Fluffernutter said, with the careful precision of someone whose worldview was undergoing fundamental reconstruction, "would you be willing to demonstrate some of these human training techniques for our research program?" "Absolutely," Tommy replied with enthusiasm that was both inspiring and slightly terrifying. "I'd love to share some of the training methods I've learned. Maybe we could adapt them for different species." The casual suggestion that human training methods might be adapted for other species caused Coach Bofflesnork to experience the sort of professional crisis that usually required career counseling and complete retraining in educational fields that involved fewer challenges to one's understanding of biological limits. "Adapted? How?" he asked carefully. "Well, every species probably has different capabilities and limitations," Tommy explained thoughtfully. "The key would be finding the right level of challenge for each individual, enough stress to promote adaptation, but not so much that it causes injury. Individualized programming based on species-specific capabilities," Dr. Snodgrass said slowly, as understanding dawned like sunrise over a landscape of revolutionary educational possibilities. "Exactly, and we could probably develop new exercises that take advantage of unique anatomical features," Tommy continued with growing excitement. "Like species with multiple arms could do exercises that humans can't even attempt, and beings with natural flexibility could explore ranges of motion that would be impossible for us. The possibility that human training philosophy could be combined with alien anatomical diversity to create entirely new forms of exercise that had never existed in galactic civilization settled over the interview room like a cosmic revelation designed by someone with access to biological innovation and unlimited creative potential." "Mr. Brewster," Professor Fluffernutter said, with the authority of someone whose career was about to be defined by the most ambitious educational experiment in galactic history, "welcome to the faculty. The first public demonstration of the Experimental Physical Education Research Program was scheduled for the following week, with invitations sent to physical education professionals throughout the galaxy." The response was immediate, overwhelming and slightly concerning from an insurance liability perspective. Representatives from 47 different star systems requested permission to observe what was being described in academic circles as either the most significant advancement in exercise science since the invention of the gravity simulator, or the most dangerous educational experiment since someone decided to teach quantum physics to philosophers. The demonstration was held in the Institute's largest gymnasium, which had been specially modified with additional medical equipment, emergency communication systems, and what Dr. Snodgrass optimistically described as comprehensive trauma response protocols. Tommy arrived for the demonstration wearing what appeared to be standard human exercise attire, which immediately caused several observers to question whether beings who considered minimal protective equipment to be adequate for physical training might possess fundamentally different concepts of safety than civilized species. "Distinguished colleagues," Professor Fluffernutter announced to the assembled crowd of academic professionals, government observers, and medical researchers, Today, we will witness a demonstration of human physical training techniques that may revolutionize our understanding of exercise physiology. The audience, which included some of the galaxy's most respected experts in physical education, settled into their observation positions with the sort of academic excitement usually reserved for breakthrough discoveries that challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality. Mr. Brewster will begin with what humans consider basic warm-up activities, Professor Fluffernutter continued, followed by demonstrations of strength training, cardiovascular exercise, and flexibility techniques. Tommy stepped into the center of the gymnasium with the sort of casual confidence that suggested he was completely unaware that his normal exercise routine was about to redefine galactic understanding of what constituted physically possible behavior. "I'll start with some basic dynamic stretching," he announced cheerfully to the assembled crowd of observers whose expertise was about to be systematically challenged by a 19-year-old who considered extreme physical exertion to be recreational activity. What followed was 45 minutes of what Tommy described as light warm-up activity, but which the academic observers classified as a systematic demonstration of capabilities that exceed established parameters of biological possibility. The dynamic stretching alone caused 3 different species representatives to request medical consultation as Tommy casually moved his joints through ranges of motion that appeared to violate basic principles of vertebrate anatomy. "Is his spine supposed to bend like that?" whispered Dr. Morphlebottom from the Andromedan Institute of Physical Sciences, her voice carrying the tone of someone whose understanding of skeletal structure was being challenged by visual evidence that seemed impossible. "According to our medical assessments," Dr. Snodgrass replied with pride, "Mr. Brewster's flexibility measurements exceed our reference standards by approximately 500%. 500%, Doctor." Quibblebonk from the Rigelian Academy of Exercise Sciences squeaked, his voice rising to frequencies that suggested either extreme academic excitement or the early stages of professional nervous breakdown. The cardiovascular demonstration that followed caused 2 observers to request emergency medical assistance for themselves, as Tommy casually performed what he described as basic cardio maintenance at speeds that exceeded the maximum capabilities of most species. "He's been running for 20 minutes, observed Professor Binglewisp from the Tau Ceti University of Physical Education, consulting his chronometer with growing amazement, at 25 miles per hour, without showing any signs of fatigue. According to our monitoring equipment," Dr. Snodgrass added helpfully, "his heart rate and respiratory patterns suggest that this level of activity is having approximately the same physiological effect as gentle walking has on most civilized species." Aduled. The strength training demonstration that concluded the session caused a complete evacuation of the gymnasium when Tommy casually lifted what appeared to be twice his body weight while explaining the importance of proper breathing technique. "Everyone out!" shouted Dr. Flauble Grimble from the emergency medical response team, his voice carrying the authority of someone whose job involved preventing catastrophic accidents. "Until we can establish proper safety protocols." As the academic observers filed out of the gymnasium with expressions ranging from amazed excitement to existential terror, Tommy looked around with the puzzled concern of someone whose normal exercise routine had apparently caused some sort of emergency situation. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked Professor Fluffernutter, his voice carrying genuine concern about having possibly violated some galactic fitness protocol he wasn't aware of. "No, Mr. Brewster," Professor Fluffernutter replied, with the satisfaction of someone whose career had just been transformed by the most successful academic demonstration in galactic history. "I believe you did everything exactly right." "And The aftermath of Tommy Brewster's demonstration rippled through galactic academic circles with the speed and impact of a cosmic revolution designed by someone who understood that the most effective way to change everything was to simply show people what was actually possible. Within 72 hours, the Galactic Institute of Physical Excellence had received funding requests from 47 different civilizations, all seeking to establish collaborative research programs focused on what was being called applied human exercise methodology in academic papers and learning how to not be completely pathetic at physical activity in more informal discussions. Professor Fluffernutter found himself at the center of an educational transformation that was redefining the fundamental principles of physical education throughout known space. His office, which had previously been a quiet sanctuary dedicated to the peaceful contemplation of mild exercise protocols, was now the headquarters of the most ambitious fitness research program in galactic history. "Professor," Whibblesnatch announced, bursting through the office door with the frantic energy of someone whose filing system had been overwhelmed by cosmic success. "We have 17 universities requesting permission to send graduate students to study under Mr. Brewster." 17. Professor Fluffernutter looked up from his correspondence with the expression of someone whose administrative responsibilities had expanded beyond anything his training had prepared him for. "What kind of graduate students? Exercise physiologists, biomechanics specialists, sports psychology researchers, and something called extreme training methodologists from the Vegan Institute of Advanced Physical Sciences." The transformation of Tommy from problematic student to galactic academic sensation was proceeding with the sort of bureaucratic efficiency that only occurred when educational institutions discovered something that could revolutionize their entire field of study. "There's more," Whibblesnatch continued, consulting his growing stack of official communications. "The Intergalactic Conference on Physical Education has requested that Mr. Brewster deliver the keynote presentation at their annual symposium." "Keynote presentation?" Professor Fluffernutter asked, though his tone suggested that he was beginning to accept that his quiet academic career had been permanently transformed by circumstances beyond his control. "The theme is redefining the limits of physical possibility in educational settings," Whibblesnatch explained. "They want him to demonstrate human training techniques to representatives from every major civilization in the galaxy." Dr. Snodgrass chose this moment to arrive with his own collection of updates that suggested the medical implications of Tommy's presence were expanding beyond anything that had been anticipated during the original crisis meetings. "Professor," Dr. Snodgrass announced with the clinical excitement of someone whose research was about to redefine an entire field of study, "I've completed the comprehensive analysis of Mr. Brewster's training methods." "And?" Professor Fluffernutter asked, though experience had taught him that when Dr. Snodgrass completed comprehensive analyses, the results usually challenged fundamental assumptions about reality. "The implications are staggering." Dr. Snodgrass consulted his research data with the enthusiasm of someone whose medical career was about to be defined by impossible discoveries. "Human training philosophy could revolutionize physical education for every species in the galaxy." "How so?" "The principle of progressive overload can be adapted for any biological system," Dr. Snodgrass explained with growing excitement. "We've been treating exercise as a way to maintain existing capabilities, but humans treat it as a method for developing new capabilities." The distinction between maintenance and development was so fundamental that Professor Fluffernutter needed several moments to process the implications for galactic educational philosophy. "You're saying that instead of helping students maintain their current fitness levels, we could help them improve beyond their starting capabilities?" "Exactly. And Mr. Brewster has agreed to help us develop species-specific training protocols," Dr. Snodgrass continued. We could create individualized programs that challenge each species within their safe limits while promoting actual improvement. The possibility that the Institute could transform from a facility that helped students maintain basic fitness into an institution that helped them achieve capabilities they had never possessed was so revolutionary that it required a complete reconceptualization of what physical education was supposed to accomplish. "There's more, Doctor," Snodgrass added with the clinical satisfaction of someone whose research was systematically dismantling established academic assumptions. Mr. Brewster's techniques could address the galaxy's most pressing health crisis. "Health crisis?" Whipplesnatch asked nervously, his gelatinous form displaying color patterns that suggested either confusion or the early stages of panic. "Galactic civilization has produced the most sedentary population in cosmic history," Dr. Snodgrass explained. "Most species have eliminated physical challenges from their daily lives so completely that their bodies are deteriorating from lack of stimulation. The revelation that galactic civilization might be accidentally destroying itself through excessive comfort and convenience settled over the office like a cosmic wake-up call, designed by someone with access to universal medical data and a twisted sense of irony. But human training methods could reverse this trend. Dr. Snodgrass continued enthusiastically. Progressive overload, adapted for each species' capabilities, could restore the physical challenges that evolution designed bodies to require. Professor Fluffernutter was beginning to realize that Tommy Brewster hadn't just challenged the Institute's curriculum. He had accidentally diagnosed and provided a solution for a problem that affected every civilized species in the galaxy. "Mr. Brewster," he said slowly, as understanding dawned like sunrise over a landscape of unprecedented opportunity, "may have just saved galactic civilization from degenerative physical decline. The final examination period at the Galactic Institute of Physical Excellence had traditionally been a quiet affair, involving gentle assessments of basic motor skills and carefully supervised demonstrations of minimal physical competency that wouldn't strain anyone's capabilities or challenge their confidence in their physical abilities. This year's final examination was being conducted in front of representatives from 37 different star systems, broadcast live to academic institutions throughout the galaxy, and monitored by medical teams whose job was to document what was being described in academic circles as the most significant advancement in exercise science since the discovery that movement was theoretically possible. Tommy Brewster stood in the center of the Institute's main gymnasium, completely unaware that his final examination was about to establish new standards for what constituted advanced physical education achievement throughout known space. "Mr. Brewster," Professor Fluffernutter announced to the assembled crowd of academic observers, government representatives and medical researchers, "please demonstrate the training techniques you have developed during your time at the Institute." What followed was a comprehensive exhibition of human physical training methods that had been adapted, modified, and customized for galactic educational applications. Tommy began with basic movement patterns that he had redesigned to accommodate species with different anatomical structures, then progressed through strength training protocols that could challenge beings regardless of their baseline capabilities. "The key principle," Tommy explained to the fascinated audience while casually performing exercises that violated several established laws of biomechanics, "is finding the right level of challenge for each individual. Everyone can improve, but the starting point and progression rate will be different for every species." Dr. Binglefoot from the Centauri Academy of Physical Sciences was making frantic notes while watching Tommy demonstrate flexibility techniques that could be modified for beings with everything from tentacles to crystalline appendages. "Remarkable," Dr. Binglefoot exclaimed to his colleagues. "He's created universal training principles that can be applied regardless of biological structure." The cardiovascular demonstration that followed caused several observers to request copies of the training protocols for immediate implementation at their own institutions. Tommy had developed interval training methods that could provide appropriate challenges for species whose maximum heart rates ranged from 40 beats per minute to 400 beats per minute. "The beauty of interval training," Tommy explained, while maintaining a pace that would have hospitalized most of the observers, "is that you can adjust the work-to-rest ratio to match anyone's capabilities. Everyone can work at their maximum intensity for their safe duration." Professor Quibblethorpe from the Rigelian Institute of Advanced Exercise was now calculating the implications of training protocols that could be customized for any species' physiological limitations. "This could revolutionize physical education throughout the galaxy," he whispered to his assistant, who was frantically recording every detail of Tommy's demonstration. "Universal principles, infinite customization." The strength training segment of Tommy's final examination caused a complete re-evaluation of what the observing academics thought they understood about the relationship between physical challenge and biological adaptation. Traditional galactic education assumed that physical capabilities were fixed, Tommy explained, while demonstrating progressive overload techniques that could be applied to any form of resistance training. But capabilities are actually adaptable. You just need to provide appropriate stimulation for improvement. Dr. Morphington from the Andromedan College of Physical Development was now making calculations that suggested either advanced exercise physiology or the early stages of a complete paradigm shift in galactic educational philosophy. He's proven that physical limitation is primarily a function of insufficient challenge rather than biological constraint, Dr. Morphington announced to anyone within hearing range. "This changes everything." The final portion of Tommy's examination involved demonstrating the psychological benefits of challenging physical training, which required explaining concepts that didn't exist in galactic educational vocabulary. "Physical challenges teach mental resilience," Tommy explained, with the passion of someone whose species had discovered that suffering could be educational. "When you push through difficulty in training, you develop confidence in your ability to handle difficulty in other areas of life. Psychological development through voluntary physical stress," Professor Fluffernutter noted for the official record, his voice carrying the tone of someone whose career had been defined by documenting impossible educational innovations. "Exactly, plus achieving fitness goals that you didn't think were possible changes your entire perspective on what you're capable of accomplishing," Tommy continued enthusiastically. "Physical training isn't just about getting stronger. It's about discovering potential you didn't know you had." The philosophical implications of treating physical education as a method for discovering unrealized potential rather than maintaining existing capabilities caused several observers to experience the sort of intellectual revelation that usually required advanced degrees in cosmic psychology to process adequately. As Tommy concluded his final examination with a demonstration of training techniques that could be adapted for group activities, individual challenges, and species-specific requirements, the assembled academic audience erupted in applause that suggested either professional appreciation or collective nervous breakdown. "Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of various biological classifications," Professor Fluffernutter announced, with the satisfaction of someone whose career had just achieved legendary status, "I present Tommy Brewster, the first graduate of our experimental physical education research program, and the being who has single-handedly revolutionized galactic understanding of what physical education can accomplish." The applause that followed was so enthusiastic that it caused structural vibrations in the space station's hull, which Dr. Snodgrass noted was probably the first time in galactic history that academic appreciation had achieved measurable impact on architectural integrity. Tommy looked around at the crowd of academics, researchers, and government representatives who were applauding his final examination with expressions ranging from professional admiration to existential awe, and smiled with the genuine humility of someone who had no idea that his normal approach to exercise had accidentally transformed an entire field of study. "Thanks, everyone!" he called out cheerfully. "This has been a really great learning experience. I hope some of these techniques are useful for your own programs." The casual suggestion that galactic academic institutions could simply implement training methods that had revolutionized physical education throughout known space caused Professor Fluffernutter to experience the sort of educational pride that usually required a lifetime of achievement to earn. But as the academic celebration continued and representatives from across the galaxy made plans to implement human training philosophy at their own institutions, Tommy was already thinking about his next challenge. "Professor Fluffernutter," he said, with the enthusiasm of someone whose appetite for learning had been stimulated rather than satisfied by his educational experience, "do you think there might be opportunities to study alien sports? I'd love to learn about athletic competitions that humans have never tried." The possibility that Tommy Brewster might next revolutionize galactic athletic competition settled over the celebration like a cosmic preview of future educational adventures that would probably require even more comprehensive insurance coverage. 6 months after Tommy Brewster's graduation from the Galactic Institute of Physical Excellence, the transformation of galactic physical education had proceeded with the sort of systematic efficiency that only occurred when an entire field of study discovered that its fundamental assumptions had been hilariously inadequate for achieving meaningful results. The institute itself had been redesigned, expanded, and transformed into the galaxy's premier research facility for what was now being called Applied Progressive Physical Development, a field of study that had been created specifically to accommodate educational approaches that actually helped students improve, rather than simply maintaining their existing capabilities. Professor Fluffernutter, who had been promoted to Director of Revolutionary Educational Methodologies, sat in his new office reviewing reports from academic institutions throughout known space, all of which were implementing training protocols that had been derived from human exercise philosophy and adapted for their specific student populations. "The results are remarkable, Dr. Snodgrass announced, entering the office with medical data that suggested either comprehensive research success or the systematic documentation of impossible achievements. Fitness levels have improved across 47 different species. Injury rates have decreased. Student satisfaction with physical education has increased by an average of 300%. 300%? Professor Fluffernutter asked, though his tone suggested that by this point he was prepared to accept that statistical improvements of impossible magnitude had become routine features of his administrative experience. "Students are actually enjoying physical education, Doctor," Snodgrass explained with the clinical enthusiasm of someone whose medical research had accidentally solved problems he hadn't known existed. "They're requesting additional training sessions. Some institutions have had to implement waiting lists for their physical education programs." The transformation of physical education from something that students endured into something they actively pursued represented such a fundamental shift in galactic educational culture that Professor Fluffernutter was still processing the implications. "And Mr. Brewster?" he asked, though he suspected that Tommy's post-graduation activities were probably continuing to challenge established assumptions about what constituted normal recreational behavior. "Currently enrolled in the Advanced Galactic Athletics program," Dr. Snodgrass replied with satisfaction. "He's studying competitive sports from 17 different civilizations and developing hybrid training methods that combine human exercise philosophy with alien athletic techniques." "Of course he is," Professor Fluffernutter said, with the resigned acceptance of someone whose career had been permanently transformed by a student whose approach to learning involved accidentally revolutionizing entire fields of study. "There's more, Doctor," Snodgrass continued, consulting his reports with growing excitement. "Mr. Brewster has been invited to establish training programs for the Galactic Olympic Games. Apparently, traditional preparation methods weren't producing athletes capable of meaningful competition. The possibility that Tommy might next transform galactic athletic competition by applying human training methods to beings whose physical capabilities spanned the entire spectrum of biological possibility was both thrilling and slightly terrifying from an insurance liability perspective. "Sir," Whibblesnatch announced, entering the office with the sort of urgent efficiency that suggested either important news or administrative crisis, "we're receiving communication requests from the Galactic Council of Educational Excellence." "The Council?" Professor Fluffernutter asked, his voice carrying the tone of someone whose success had apparently attracted the attention of bureaucratic entities whose approval could either validate his career or bury it under regulations that hadn't been designed to accommodate educational innovations that challenged reality. "They want to discuss implementing human-derived physical education protocols as mandatory curriculum throughout all galactic educational institutions," Whibblesnatch explained with excitement that was causing his gelatinous form to vibrate at frequencies that were interfering with nearby electronic equipment. The prospect of Tommy Brewster's accidental educational revolution becoming standard practice throughout galactic civilization was so ambitious that Professor Fluffernutter needed several moments to process the administrative implications. "Mandatory curriculum," he repeated slowly, as understanding dawned like sunrise over a landscape of unprecedented bureaucratic responsibility. "Universal implementation of progressive physical development protocols," Dr. Snodgrass added enthusiastically. "Every student in the galaxy would have access to training methods that actually help them improve, which means," Professor Fluffernutter continued with growing realization, "that we would be responsible for training instructors who could implement these methods for every species in known space." The magnitude of the educational project that was being proposed settled over the office like a cosmic challenge designed by someone who understood that the most effective way to change everything was to start with one impossible student and let the implications expand naturally. "Sir," Whibblesnatch said carefully, "should I schedule the meeting with the Galactic Council?" Professor Fluffernutter looked around his office at the reports documenting successful implementation of human training philosophy across dozens of different civilizations, the medical data proving that progressive physical development could benefit every known species, and the communication requests from academic institutions seeking guidance on revolutionizing their own programs. "Schedule the meeting," he said, with the authority of someone whose career had been defined by discovering that the most impossible students often provided the most valuable educational opportunities. "And Whibblesnatch?" "Yes, sir. Make sure Mr. Brewster is available for consultation. Something tells me the galaxy is going to need his expertise." Dree. As the late afternoon light filtered through the office windows of what had once been a quiet academic institution dedicated to minimal physical education and had somehow become the center of a galactic fitness revolution, Professor Fluffernutter reflected on the cosmic irony of his situation. He had started the academic year worried about accommodating one problematic student whose exercise requirements exceeded their equipment capabilities. He was ending it as the director of an educational program that was transforming physical education throughout known space. Tommy Brewster had arrived as a Deathworlder whose casual fitness routine had threatened to break their gymnasium. He was graduating as the being who had accidentally proven that every species in the galaxy had been dramatically underestimating their own physical potential. The transformation had been so complete, so revolutionary and so successful that Professor Fluffernutter was beginning to suspect that the universe had a sense of humor about educational challenges that was both more subtle and more effective than anyone had previously realized. His communication device chimed with an incoming message from Tommy himself, transmitted from the Advanced Galactic Athletics program, where he was apparently continuing to revolutionize everything he encountered through the simple expedient of treating impossible challenges as interesting opportunities for improvement. Professor Fluffernutter, hope you're doing well. Quick question. Do you think there's any interest in developing training programs for species that live in zero-gravity environments? I've been working with some really fascinating athletes here, and I think we could create some amazing new exercises that take advantage of three-dimensional movement. Also, I met this creature from the Magellanic Clouds who can change her density at will, and I think we could develop strength training protocols that would blow your mind. Let me know what you think. P.S. Thanks again for giving me the chance to learn about galactic fitness. This has been the best educational experience of my life. Professor Fluffernutter smiled as he read the message, recognizing the enthusiasm of someone whose approach to learning involved accidentally discovering new frontiers of possibility wherever he went. Somewhere in the galaxy, there were probably species that possessed physical capabilities that would make human exercise requirements seem modest by comparison. And somewhere else, there were probably beings whose approach to fitness made Tommy Brewster's training methods look like gentle recreational activity. But in this particular corner of space, at this particular moment in galactic educational history, one enthusiastic human teenager had managed to prove that the most revolutionary discoveries often came from the simplest questions. What if we could actually get better